We're in Unit 4 and we're picking up with one of the writing assignments that has to do with Corelli. Take a look over here and see the very opening of it. We did this chunk together, really just focusing on these two chords because that's a little bit of a tricky spot. I'm going to go to another page now, this one, which has some tricky stuff in it as well. One of the things is that this modulates. And so you have to find a place to pivot. So let me just give you a quick look through to see how you might approach an issue like this. I always want to get the big picture first. The biggest part here is that we're in the second section of a binary form piece. This is the second reprise here. And overall I'm in E minor. I'm starting here on a B chord. That sharp means 5 with a sharp third above the bass, that D sharp, B, D sharp, F sharp. So we're on the dominant here. Just scanning, you can see that you've got a pattern and a sequenced repetition of it. So a sequence is happening in this system. It moves down by step, and then even though we get that same motive or variant of it, it's now down too low to continue the sequence. It would have had to go F sharp, E, and then down to D if this participated in the sequence, but it doesn't. So we're breaking off the sequence here. I see a lot of accidentals, and I know that that probably means that we're going to have some secondary dominants in there. We'll come back and check that out in more detail. This second system, it's got its own little shape. It looks like a phrase coming to a close here. And sure enough, we have 5, 5, 1 kind of motion. Alright, so this is landing on B, and because we've got B's in both parts, it's going to be a perfect authentic cadence in whatever key this is. Now this is going to be B minor. See, they've got no mark to sharp. You don't have a sharp like this to raise the third of the chord. So this is in 5. That's normal that it should be a minor 5 as a key, because if you put the sharp in there, you're adding the leading tone, and that would pull you right back into E minor. You don't want that. You don't want to pull right back into E minor if you're modulating to B minor. So if B is going to be a key center, the key will be B minor, a minor 5. Okay. When we get back to this, we'll want to figure out, okay, how did we get there? It is the middle of a phrase here, so we want a pivot chord. In other words, a common chord, a chord that belongs to both whatever key we're coming from and then also belonging to 5. We're probably coming from E and going E minor and going to B minor. So we'll need a pivot, a chord that belongs to both E minor and B minor. All right. Then, oh, another sequence going on here. If you read about some of these words like fonte, monte, this is a fonte pattern. When you read about binary, you can see more about that terminology. But again, we're going down as we did before, down by step. Same pattern, isn't it? Same motive. Okay, and then we've got some accidentals, and when I see a sharp, I think, it's a leading tone, and I can play off that. We'll come back to this though. Finally, one last phrase. That's very similar, isn't it, to this one? Wow, it's the same thing, just transposed. Now we're back in E, so we get 5, 5, 1, and 2 to 1 going on in the key of E minor. Okay, so now that we've got the big picture, sequence, phrase ending in a new key, sequence, phrase back in tonic, now we can get into some details. And here is where the principle of accidentals can really help. Remember the two rules of thumb. If you see an accidental that raises a note, it's probably a leading tone. If you see an accidental that lowers a note, you're probably dealing with a chordal seventh. So we can, because we have figures here, we'll have a record on the page of any time an accidental needs to appear, even if it's not shown in those two outer parts. accidentals are going to help us big time. Some pieces did not have figures. It's called an unfigured bass, and there you'd be, if you're the keyboardist or the lutenist, the fretted instrument of whatever sort, if you're the chordal person, you'd be looking at the melody, the main melody up above, and then the bass line down below, no figures, and you'd have to take that counterpoint and go, okay, I think I know what chord goes here, and improvise on the spot the chords to fit those two outer voices. Fortunately, we have a figure bass here, so we don't have to do all that, but that's really remarkable that you could be expected to do that, and it was pretty common not to have figures. Well, we've got figures here, so that's going to indicate our chords. Let's take a look at some of these accidentals we're referring to. So here we already noticed that there's a sharp here, and that sharp gives us the leading tone in the key. D sharp is the leading tone to E, so that's not going to be a secondary dominant, but that's the dominant, 5. Going to 1 here, you can see the resolution. They have some special notes in the directions about these kind of figures. This is not a new chord, but the dissonance occurs above the bass because of this note. It's a passing tone. And when it finally moves up here, all these intervals are going to shrink. So let me just put up some of those so you can see the point here. The B is a 7th above the bass. A 4th above the bass note, C sharp, is this F sharp here. And then as this bass line moves up, the intervals shrink. So what was a 4th becomes a 3rd, and what was a 7th becomes a 6th. So it's really that, but they like to put it on a beat instead of on the end of a beat. That 7/4 is really indicating that we need a 6/3 position chord on the D sharp. These kinds of dissonances are going to happen several times. There's some in this other sequence too. So you'll see the 7/4 happening a good bit, and that's purely the result of the passing motion in the bass. No need to fret about it. But the nice thing is, figures are so literal. If you just follow them and say, okay, these are intervals above the bass, that's what figures are, you can realize it without any trouble, just like I did here. All right, moving on, let's look at this accidental. Here's the first real motion outside the key. Here's C sharp, 6/3 position chord, so I know that that's not the root, that's the chordal third, and there's the root. Now in E, that's scale degree 4, but wait a minute, we don't want to write 4 most likely, because look how it resolves. This is a sequence after all. That sounded like a dominant going to 1, so this is not going to sound like 4, it's going to sound like a dominant of this. Okay, so forget the 4, I'm going to scratch that and put 5 and show that that C sharp is really acting as a leading tone to D. Now let's make sure, if you don't add any accidentals, the normal quality for a 7 is this. And see how the figures help me. I know you're not altering this chord because the accidentals would show up in the figures. It's the diatonic chord, the 7. Notice if it had been a raised note, it could have been this. But the diatonic chord is that, the chord that fits the key of E minor. Alright, and that's just playing around inside the chord, motion from the root to the third. So this 7 lasts for that whole part. Okay, now there is no chordal 7th here, and the leading tone is resolved for you. So really the voice leading is going to be very easy within these chromatic sequences. Just make sure that you use as much contrary motion as you can, and you should be good. Now the issue of a pivot, we're modulating to 5, minor 5. We're starting here. Let's see what this would be. So you know what I might need to do? I might need to reinterpret the 7. 7 is the same as 5 of 3, and so if we go to 3, we might be better off writing this as 5 of 3. Let's see what happens next. That is 3. Look at that. Okay. but then look how quickly he moves to. Okay, so he's giving you a little hint of this. This is really kind of in the cracks here. Because I've got nothing written here, I know it's this. So I will end up playing a 3, but look at how it quickly turns into a 1 right afterwards. So this 3 is like a, well, it's a tonic substitute, substituting for a 1/6, and that's why these are so closely related to one another. Okay, root position 1, first inversion 1 chord. So this does make sense to show it as this. This is 5 of 3. Here's our 3. Slide back into your 1 and you're clarifying that yes, we have a tonic function here. Okay, now this has a sharp. Why do we have an A sharp here? You see why it's good to look for the cadence points and get the big picture first? Because I might spend a bunch of time notating this as some kind of secondary dominant unless I realize that, hey, wait a minute, my whole goal is, the goal in this phrase, is to get to B, and here's my leading tone to B already, and there it actually resolves. Okay, so I'm in the new key starting right here. I'm going to switch over and say in B minor, this is going to be 5. Now wait a minute, I need to back up and show some sort of pivot. Okay, so let me move this B back a little. Can I use this chord? Yeah, that'll work. So my 1 will become 4. Let me show you how that works. E minor is 1 in the key of E minor. But what's E minor in the key of B? Well, if you think of, here's your B, or wherever you'd like to picture it, then E is a 4th up from there. In other words, it's scale degree 4 with respect to B. That makes that a minor 4 chord. Notice their quality has to match because it is the same chord. Just two different views of it. One of them is from the perspective of E minor, and the other symbol is from the perspective of B minor. So there's our pivot. Okay, let me review the thinking that you want to use here. Get the big picture. See where the cadence points come. Listen for those and then work backwards. If you're in a new key at a cadence, don't bother showing these as a bunch of secondary dominants when you have accidentals, but realize that I'm in the new key. Now the pivot chord will precede the first new dominant. So this is the dominant in the new key, and I want to find a chord previous to it that works in both keys, and that shows, that pivot shows how you ease your way into the new key. It basically explains why it sounds so fluid, how it's so easy and smooth to transition into that new key. That's really the purpose of this analysis, this process of finding a pivot in the first place. Okay, so now we know, I've given you hopefully a process that you can use, and also why we do a pivot. Let's look at a couple of details and we'll be done. So this goes 5 to 1 here in B minor. Here's our 2, 5. Look at the 4. What's that doing? Well, it's going here. So when we write an analysis, we write 4-3. That's the sharp 3 there, to show it as a suspension. And they're sharping C sharp to make it fit the key of B minor. That's the purpose of that sharp 5. Okay, so really the chord is embellished by a 4-3 suspension, and the chord comes in right here. It's the dominant. 2, 5, 1. That all makes good sense. Let me move that down so it's on a line with these. Alright, so we go 4, 5, 1 in inversion. So an embedded progression following the phrase model. And then the real cadence, predominant, dominant, tonic. And we're in the new key. Alright, I'll let you take it from there. Let me bump over to a new place. Watch out for accidentals again. I'll let you tackle those. One other little spot that could prove a little tricky, and that's on this in the first reprise. So let me back up to here, and I'm going to briefly mention that there are some sevenths here, but then they end up in the bass. Let me show you. So here you've got a six chord with a chordal seventh added to it. And that, let me see where I'm coming from, and I'll go ahead and pick some voice leading. Okay, so I've got a B here. I can hang on to that B. That gives me the seventh above the bass. I definitely need a third above the bass. That's going to be an E. And I can bring it in from the D over here. And I can hold over the G that was the alto, so to speak. Okay, so now I've got that complete chord. C, E, G, and B natural. Now you know you have to resolve the seventh, so you're thinking, okay, I'll move to an A. See the problem with that? If I move to an A here in this upper voice, it'll be doing exactly what the bass is doing. So it is resolving the seventh for me. It's treating it as, yeah, passing seventh, but it's doing the job of resolving. I don't want to do the same thing here. So you've got two options. Because we're doing what a keyboardist, or, yeah, in this case a keyboardist, would be doing on the fly, they are a little flexible in how they treat these things. So they would say, all right, I got my B, it's getting resolved here. I'm going to just move to some other, in another direction, to another chord tone. I'm avoiding parallels that way, that's good, but I am doubling for a moment that chordal seventh. So if you're real finicky, you would want to move away, jump down here in the upper voice, and then go up here to get off of the chordal seventh. But as I mentioned, because this is something that you'd be doing on the spur of the moment, you really wouldn't worry about that. You would worry about the parallels, avoiding them, but the doubled seventh would not worry you. Okay, now we've got another similar kind of motion here. A's the root, because we've got 5-3 implied there. We're in the key of E, so that's a 4 chord. Let me write this one into, that's a 2/2 diminished. 5-1. Okay, so here's a little run toward tonic using the phrase model. Tonic substitute, perhaps, and then predominance, moving to the dominant to tonic. All right, now back to the details. A, good, that's contrary motion. I'm moving up from that G to this A in contrary motion with the bass. Keep the E. All right, now let's see what happens when we move to this chord. There's no seventh, so bringing in the seventh there is not a problem at all. All I need to avoid doing is moving from A down to F. That would be a problem because it'd be doing what the bass is doing. F sharp, A, C, and now we bring in the seventh. So I really can just sustain or re-articulate. I'm re-articulating here. All right, here's where that same issue comes up. See, the seventh of the chord ends up here in the bass as a passing motion down to the leading tone, D sharp. So I don't want to resolve this E downward the way this one is. Again, I can leap away from it. That would be fine. Or let me give you the other option. We could have done it here as well. We could just step to the root if we like. And remember, I'm being finicky in doing this, so if you want to just move up to your F sharp here, I'd be okay with that as well. Okay, so let's see, where do we want these guys to go? We need a B, D sharp, F sharp, and an A. That's what that fifth means. I need a fifth up. That's the chordal fifth. Let me rearrange those slightly, and we'll call it a day for this example. Okay, so watch out for these spots where you've got a chordal seventh that you already played, that you put up in a higher voice. When it shows up in the bass, you're going to let that bass line resolve it and make sure you go in another direction with that same note. Jump off of it and go somewhere new, or you could get away with just that. That's fine too. That would work just fine. These are fancy ways of getting so that you never double the chordal seventh. All right, I think we've covered the main issues there.